It's that time of year again when we solemnly remember the war dead by dressing our children up as giant poppies, cosplaying as First World War soldiers, decorating our gardens with mannequins made up to look like soldiers who died in the trenches. To me, it's like a symbol of obedience, and remembrance is a kind of carnival obedience, military obedience. And there is a problem when arms firms, big death, are making money out of wars, and yet they're pushing a bit of money into aftercare for veterans. BAE Systems and Lockheed, they're big contributors to these charities, and there has to be somewhere in there an ethical question. I guess it's kind of like greenwashing, but it's like war washing, patriotism washing, where they feel that they can kind of wash away some of their sin somehow, giving money to charities which help wounded and mentally ill and old soldiers, many of whom of course have been injured in wars from which those big corporations have directly benefited. We need to examine that, particularly when I talk to older veterans, World War II veterans, who unlike millennial veterans are maybe still quite attached to the poppy because their dads were in the trenches. I mean, it has a very different meaning, and I think at some point back in the mists of history, the red poppy symbolised almost insurgent grief and sadness. It's probably the only sense in which I'm a conservative is that I kind of want remembrance to be serious again, to go back to some previous, maybe mythologized version of remembrance when it was actually a serious occasion. To honour the war dead and respect the war dead, we try and keep their numbers to an absolute minimum. I think that's the way. No happy clappy remembrance, no poppy fascism, no virtue signalling or veteran signalling. We try and respect the dead by keeping their numbers to a minimum, and that's soldiers and civilians throughout the world.
War is a calculated and a condoned slaughter of human beings.
I joined the military probably for the same reasons most of my cohort did. I'm from a working class background, I was poor, I wanted opportunities. To some extent there was the ideological stuff. I had an idea because of the way we think about the military in this country and because what the army tells recruits about itself, that you can go and do something of value, you can contribute something to the world. The arguments about helping women in Afghanistan, getting rid of tyrants are all very appealing. And in a way, you should want to go and do those things. It's just that as it turns out, that is not what the British military does. I joined, went to Afghanistan, decided I didn't agree with the war based on my experiences there, and was initially charged with AWOL, was later raised to desertion. Then we used my court-martial to indict them, saying I wasn't obliged to go to the wars because the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were illegal and unjustified. At that moment, they dropped all the charges for speaking to the media and the desertion down to the AWOL, which I couldn't deny. I wasn't there, I never denied being AWOL in the first place. So eventually I ended up getting 9 months in Colchester military prison. Loads of people there were equally angry, had also been stitched up by the military institution. Loads of guys with PTSD who'd come back from tour damaged, had been let down by the military. The army markets itself quite cleverly as kind of like one team, which is almost egalitarian. Everyone's on the same side. This is absolute rubbish. The contradictions which exist in society, the class divisions, exist even more in the army, but they exist with even more absolute power because there's no trade unions, there's no democracy. There are officers, the posh blokes, the middle class sergeants and staff sergeants and colour sergeants, the petty bourgeoisie, reviled, the corporals and so on. And then down at the bottom you have the workforce. Every army is a reflection of the society it's drawn from, and those contradictions are apparent there as well. There is a perception that if you've been in the military or around the military, you can only ever be a small C Tory or basically a fascist. And I think that's kind of reinforced in our media narratives and in our culture. And actually it's as far from the truth as you can get. There is a long and proud radical military tradition of dissent and mutiny. All the way back to 1647, the New Model Army, when soldiers and officers presented a democratic constitution to the generals of the army, Oliver Cromwell and people like that. And it's the basis of our politics today. Peterloo is a really good example, protesting the Corn Laws in Manchester. Hundreds of people were massacred by the local yeomanry, and among them was a young former British soldier who'd been a drummer boy, John Lees, at Waterloo. He died of his wounds shortly afterwards. And then you can follow that through to the histories of dissent and rebellion by serving soldiers, the mutinies at Etap through the First World War. Immediately after those wars, military veterans were involved in all kinds of radicalism, all the way through to the Second World War, where you see things like the Cairo parliaments, where a bunch of soldiers started voting to do things like nationalise the Bank of England, bring in full education, decolonise Egypt. After the Second World War, you see things like the 43 Group, a group of Jewish anti-fascist veterans who fought the fascists, who still existed in here. Oswald Mosley was still kicking after the Second World War. And it carries on all the way through to resistance movements and individual resistance against Iraq, Afghanistan, the Falklands, the First Gulf War. So these are real things. And that's not to say people don't spend time in the institution, which is right-wing, which is conservative, that is what the military is, and they aren't shaped by it. I mean, that's absolutely true. Those people clearly exist, but there's another story there to be told. Sometimes it's difficult, I think, because people have these preconceived notions of what you are and what you think if you're a veteran, because they don't know the history. So I've had occasions where people have assumed I'm some kind of imperialist murderer, that I'm a psychopath, and that's why I joined the army. And I suspect that's partly because I was a soldier, but also partly it reflects a broader contempt for working class people among sections of the left. And I don't give a shit what they think. In the same way I don't give a shit what officers think. Those people are irrelevant to me. There is a tendency for middle class leftists, I think, just to want to write loads of working class people off because they haven't read all the books and they don't sound as polished and they didn't go to Oxford and their name isn't John T. And that is not me. People from the worst backgrounds, who are very often the people that end up in the army, going to that institution, they're often brutalised in different ways. They're trained and indoctrinated, but they still resist. Some of them still resist. Sometimes war can radicalise people in the right direction towards something better. Okay, it's a complex and nuanced story. And I think that's something redeeming about the human character, that you can go through all that and still end up on the right side. Military people, veterans, soldiers, sailors, airmen, have a role to play in society which is positive, which isn't just turning up every year and prancing around in your poppy and dressing your kids up as a giant poppy. That something good can come from the bad, that something positive can come from the military experience and the veteran experience. We're not all locked into just being sad old men moaning about Shamima Begum on Facebook and Jeremy Corbyn on Facebook forever. Something good can come from it. Veteranhood, Rage and Hope in British Ex-Military Life, out the 9th of October. If you want to understand military culture, if you want to understand the military, if you want to understand veterans, you need to get it. And if you want to see more films like this, which challenge the narrative, sign up for Double Down News on Patreon.